Corrected text. A poor man falls in love with a rich girl he saved. Will she or her family accept him? Let's join this journey and find out. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more updates. Sit back and enjoy. The story begins in a hotel bar. The man orders a drink but notices a lady drowning in the pool. He rescues her and takes her to a room because she is unconscious. He lays her on the bed and removes his wet clothes to dry off, leaving him half naked. When she wakes up, she is startled, but he reassures her, apologizes for his state, and says she shouldn't have been in the pool alone. As he prepares to leave, she asks him to stay because she feels traumatized. He agrees, saying his clothes are drying. He mentions that her phone has been ringing and answers the door when someone knocks. It's a man named Bob, who enters with suspicion. Despite Becky, the girl, explaining the situation, Bob remains doubtful. Becky's savior comes out fully clothed, ready to leave. Bob offers him money as a reward, but he refuses. Bob rudely remarks, "Why would a poor man reject money?" Becky scolds Bob for being disrespectful, and her savior leaves. Becky, embarrassed, walks him out. That evening, Becky calls her savior to apologize for her brother Bob's rude behavior. She asks why he rejected the money, and he explains that he didn't save her for a reward. They plan to meet for lunch in 2 days, and he asks how she's feeling. She admits she's still shaken and thanks him for offering to check on her. Meanwhile, Bob argues with his fiancée at home. She accuses him of partying and cheating, showing him incriminating photos sent by her friends. Bob rudely dismisses her accusations, calling the women in the photos his friends and insisting they're more accomplished than she'll ever be. She pleads for honesty, but he storms out angrily. The next morning, Bob's fiancée prepares breakfast, but he refuses to eat. She apologizes for the previous night, taking all the blame. Though he says he forgives her, he rejects her food and warns her not to bring up such issues again. When she tries to touch him, he pulls away, cold and distant. Becky's savior visits her 2 days later, and they compliment each other's appearances before heading out together. Meanwhile, Bob's fiancée confides in a friend about her marital struggles. Her friend advises her to stand her ground and not let Bob mistreat her. The fiancée defends her attempts to save the relationship, and her friend warns her not to regret her choices. Later, after Becky and her savior return from lunch, she thanks him for the lovely time. He requests to take photos of her, admiring her beauty. She happily agrees, and they make plans for the next day. Excited, they hug before parting ways. That night, Bob receives a call while in bed with his fiancée. He stepped out to take the call and told the unknown caller that he missed her. He said he enjoyed their last meeting and promised the next one would be even better. He added that he wanted it to be naughtier than the last time. He assured her he would send money so she could buy some things for herself, unaware that his wife was standing at the door, listening to his conversation. When he ended the call and opened the door, he found his wife waiting. She confronted him, asking who the woman was and how long they had been meeting. Bob dismissed her questions, asking why she was yelling in the middle of the night. His lack of remorse upset her even more. She accused him of not caring about their marriage, to which Bob coldly replied that he wasn't cheating. But even if he were, the other women didn't live with him. He reminded her that she was his wife and had his ring. Frustrated, Bob told her that if she didn't like it, she could return the ring and leave. His wife, shocked, apologized, saying it hadn't reached that point. Bob went back to bed, and when she tried to cuddle with him, he pushed her away, telling her to sleep and leave him alone. The next morning, she visited her friend in tears, explaining how much she loved Bob. Her friend angrily told her she lacked self-respect for allowing Bob to mistreat her. She criticized Ivy, Bob's wife, for being too desperate and warned her about how things would only worsen after marriage. Calling Ivy's name repeatedly, she said, "Men cheat and so do women, but if I were you, but I can't be, you should walk away. It's called self-respect. There are still responsible men out there." Ivy responded, "I've dated broke guys who cheated on me too. I'd rather stay with a devil I can benefit from. You don't expect me to drop everything because of ordinary cheating. Besides, of all the women out there, he chose me to be his wife. I just want to focus on the fact that he's marrying me, and everything he owns will belong to me and my kids. I'll be fine." The next day, Becky's savior came over to take her pictures as planned. After a long session, Becky looked at the photos and was amazed by how beautiful they were. They almost kissed, but drew back, apologizing to each other and feeling uncomfortable. Later that day, someone dropped off a package at Becky's doorstep. She brought it inside and unwrapped it, discovering a collection of cute items along with a framed photo of herself taken by her savior. Inside was also a letter expressing his feelings for her. Overwhelmed with happiness, Becky called him, and he came over. When she opened the door, they locked eyes and kissed deeply. They spent the evening together in her room. Becky woke up the next morning, lying on his chest and smiling happily. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was shocked to see her brother, Bob. She felt extremely uncomfortable as he entered and saw her savior in bed. Her savior woke up in shock upon seeing Bob. Bob was furious and demanded to know what was going on. Becky nervously told him that her savior was her boyfriend. Bob became even angrier, accusing her boyfriend of being a gold digger. Becky defended him, saying he wasn't after her money and that they were in love. She explained that her savior never pushed for the relationship. She had pursued him. Bob, still fuming, insisted they leave immediately and return to his house. At Bob's house, he told Becky that he loved her and didn't want anyone to hurt her. Becky assured him that she loved him too, but asked him not to see her boyfriend as a threat. She pleaded with Bob not to stand in the way of her happiness. Bob finally relented, saying, "All right, I'll watch and see how this goes." Bob then asked about the framed picture he had seen of her. When Becky told him her boyfriend had made it, Bob was surprised and asked if he was a photographer. Becky confirmed, and Bob admitted it was a beautiful piece of art. He told her, "That's very impressive. I love it." Becky suggested to Bob that since he was planning his wedding, her boyfriend Leo could be the photographer for the event. Ivy immediately disagreed, saying she didn't want Becky's boyfriend involved. Bob, irritated, told Ivy that it was his wedding. He was paying for everything, and he had the right to hire whoever he wanted. He then silenced Ivy, who retorted that it was their wedding, not just his. Ivy insisted she didn't want Becky's boyfriend to handle the photography. Becky stepped in, asking Bob to take it easy on Ivy. In response, Bob told Ivy that if she wanted to have a say, she should start contributing money, then stormed out angrily. Becky apologized to Ivy for Bob's behavior, but Ivy called him rude and annoying. Becky tried to explain that the photographer was her boyfriend, surprising Ivy, who hadn't known Becky was dating anyone. Becky shared the story of how she met Leo, and the two women laughed, lightening the tension. Ivy admitted she was happy for Becky. Later, Leo visited Becky, but when Bob walked into the room, Leo stood up in shock. Bob introduced Leo as the wedding photographer and told Becky to make Leo feel comfortable. Then, Bob left the room, with Ivy following behind. Becky asked Leo if he was okay, and he reassured her that he was. She went to get him something, but Leo remained visibly uneasy. In the kitchen, Ivy asked Becky if Leo was really her boyfriend. She lingered, trying to get more information about him, but then said she needed to get ready before Bob became angry and left. Becky was left surprised by Ivy's curiosity. Leo took Ivy and Bob's pre-wedding photos as planned. Later, Leo told Becky he would be leaving town soon. He explained that his friend's wife had returned, and she wasn't comfortable with him staying there anymore. He admitted that the space couldn't accommodate all three of them, and that he had no other options. Becky suggested talking to her brother, Bob, about letting Leo stay at their house. Leo was hesitant, saying Bob didn't like him, and he didn't want to cause trouble. Becky insisted she could convince Bob to let him stay so Leo could finish the contract he was working on. Although Leo wasn't entirely on board with the idea, he agreed as he had no other options. Later that day, Bob confronted Leo, saying, "I see my sister likes you." Leo replied honestly, "Yes, I love her." Bob, skeptical, chuckled and said, "You want me to believe that?" Leo firmly responded, "It is what it is. Either you believe it or not." Bob smirked, handed Leo his camera and warned him, "If you ever hurt my sister, I'll find you and make you pay." At that moment, Becky and Ivy walked in, serving food. They all sat down to eat, but during the meal, Ivy began choking. Bob scolded her, asking angrily, "What's your problem? Must you do this here?" Ivy tried to explain, saying it wasn't intentional, but Bob cut her off, snapping, "Are you still talking?" Hurt, Ivy left the table and went back to her room, crying and questioning why she had to be with Bob. Later, Becky talked to Bob about letting Leo stay with them. Bob was unhappy with the idea and expressed his distrust of Leo. Becky pleaded on Leo's behalf, and although Bob was still unsure, he said he would think about it, making it clear he wasn't making any promises. He told Becky not to thank him yet. The next day, Leo arrived with his bags, and Ivy opened the door for him. Surprised, she asked if he was traveling. Leo explained that he had issues with his previous accommodation and would be staying there for a while. Ivy reacted angrily, saying, "Why would you stay here? If we needed help, we could have hired someone." Becky appeared and overheard the commotion. She said she was surprised that her husband, Bob, hadn't mentioned Leo staying with them. Ivy sarcastically replied that Bob must have forgotten and apologized for the noise, then begrudgingly welcomed Leo before leaving. Becky apologized to Leo for Ivy's attitude, then helped him carry his bags to his new room. Ivy grew jealous of the love between Leo and Becky. She went to her friend and told her everything happening at her house, revealing that the new photographer, Leo, was her ex and also Becky's boyfriend. Her friend was shocked and said, "What goes around comes around." Ivy explained how inconvenient the situation was for her, but her friend advised her to take it easy and assured her that everything would work out for the best. Later that evening, Bob came home and asked Becky and Leo if they were okay. They said yes, and he then asked if Ivy was back yet before heading to his room. After Bob left, Leo joked, asking why her brother was so uptight, as if he had never played as a child. They both laughed it off. Suddenly, Bob shouted with excitement from his room, announcing that he had gotten the contract he was waiting for. Later that night, Ivy returned home, but Bob flew into a rage, accusing her of leaving him hungry. Ivy apologized and explained that she had gone to visit her friend, Avon, but Bob wouldn't hear it. He accused her of cheating and declared that she must never leave the house without his permission again. Ivy, fed up, snapped, "I'm not your prisoner. You can't control me like this." Bob angrily told her to leave. The argument spilled into the living room, where Leo and Becky were. Ivy was begging Bob to go with her to pick a wedding dress. But Bob dismissed her, saying she should call her father to see if he could afford what Bob wanted to buy. Becky tried to intervene, but Bob told her to stay out of it. Ivy retorted, asking Bob to respect her family, but Bob mocked her, saying her family was poor and that she should be grateful for the life he had given them. Humiliated, Ivy walked out. Bob yelled after her, saying, "By the time I'm back, I want you out of this house." Leo tried to calm Bob down, but Bob silenced him and stormed out. Later, Ivy went to apologize to Leo for everything that had happened between them. She admitted that she felt she had lost a good man because of her impatience and poor choices. She told him she now saw how well he treated Becky and couldn't help but wonder what could have been. She expressed regret for disrespecting him in the past. Becky walked in at that moment and demanded to know what was going on. She had overheard part of their conversation and was upset. Leo explained everything, revealing that Ivy had encouraged him to steal and engage in illegal activities to meet her financial demands. He also said that Ivy had broken up with him because he was broke. Becky felt hurt that Leo hadn't told her this before. Leo apologized sincerely, explaining that meeting Ivy again at Becky's house was a coincidence and that he had intended to tell Becky eventually. He also revealed that his studio had burned down, causing him to lose everything, which is why he had been starting over. Becky forgave him, telling him she loved him, but asked him not to hide anything from her in the future. They hugged deeply, resolving to move forward together. That evening, Becky went to Ivy's room. Ivy apologized, saying she couldn't continue living like this and had decided to leave Bob. She admitted that everything happening to her felt like karma for how she treated Leo in the past. She also expressed how disrespected she felt by Bob, who cheated on her, insulted her parents, and constantly put her down. Ivy said she had learned her lesson and needed to leave to fix her life. She packed her belongings and expressed her happiness for Becky and Leo, wishing them the best. Ivy confronted Bob when he returned home, expressing her pain and frustration. She told him she couldn't stay any longer because he didn't respect or regard her. Crying, she explained how his behavior had worn her down. Bob, unfazed, asked her what she intended to do. When Ivy said she was leaving him, he sarcastically asked why she'd make such a decision just days before their wedding. Ivy replied that it wasn't worth sacrificing her dignity. Bob rudely told her he wouldn't beg her to stay and shouted for her to leave. Heartbroken, Ivy packed her belongings and left the house in tears while Bob lay on his bed, seething with anger. Downstairs, Ivy ran into Leo and told him she was breaking up with Bob and leaving for good. She admitted she had realized life wasn't just about money, but about being where one is happy and respected. Ivy apologized to Leo for how she treated him in the past, praising him for being a good man, and wished him and Becky happiness. With her bags in hand, Ivy walked away. Becky, witnessing the scene from afar, hugged Leo sadly, sharing in Ivy's heartbreak. Becky then confronted Bob, telling him she was disappointed in his arrogance and how he disrespected people because of his wealth. She criticized his belief that money granted him the right to mistreat others. Bob dismissed her concerns, saying Ivy would return, as she always did. Becky firmly told him Ivy wouldn't come back because he had pushed her too far this time, and his attitude had ruined too many relationships. Bob, defensive, warned Becky to watch her tone, refusing to accept responsibility. Later, Becky found Leo in the living room and noticed he seemed troubled. He told her he had decided to leave because he had received a job offer that included accommodation, and he needed to move immediately. Becky was sad, but also proud of him for moving forward in his career. Leo reassured her, saying they could still spend time together, and thanked her for everything. They kissed before Leo left. The next day, Bob became anxious about Ivy's absence, especially with the wedding only 2 days away. He asked Becky what to do, and she advised him to apologize to Ivy if he wanted to save their relationship. Bob resisted, but Becky reminded him that his wealth made him expect others to bow to him, which was why his relationships often failed. She pointed out that if the roles were reversed, he wouldn't have tolerated such treatment. Taking Becky's advice, Bob went to Ivy's friend Avan's house to apologize. He expressed regret for the way he had treated her and sincerely asked for forgiveness. Ivy, however, was unmoved. She brought out his ring, handed it back, and told him she never wanted to see him again. Heartbroken, Bob returned home and confided in Becky. He admitted he didn't know how to face his friends and felt ashamed of his actions. Becky comforted him, saying a broken relationship was better than a broken marriage. She encouraged him to view it as a lesson and assured him that true love would come his way when he was ready to change. Bob thanked her for always being there for him. The next day, Becky discovered a gift and a letter in the living room. The letter was from Leo, asking her to marry him. As she read it, Leo walked in and proposed to her in person. Overjoyed, Becky said yes, and Leo slipped the ring onto her finger. Bob entered the room, congratulating the couple. Despite his regret over his own failed relationship, Bob expressed happiness for Becky and hugged her warmly. Becky and Leo lived happily ever after, while Bob reflected on his mistakes and began working on becoming a better person. Thanks for enjoying this captivating story from my world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating tales. See you in the next movie.